Hello, everyone. Welcome to Digital Debates by TRT World Forum. This is the third session of series, Turkey's Middle East Policy, Time for De-Escalation and Normalization. Today, we are going to talk about Turkey-Iran relations. As neighbors, Turkey and Iran have historically had a complicated relationship. In the last decade, relations have been strained by several issues. Their opposing positions in Syria and divergent policies in Iraq are two of the key security related concerns that both states have raised. On the one hand, as guarantor states of the Astana process, Ankara and Tehran, along with Moscow, have found areas where they can cooperate in combating terrorism and preserving the territorial integrity of Syria. On the other hand, Turkey's military operations countering the PKK-YPG terrorist threat in northern Syria have caused concerns for the Iranians. While security issues continue to be subject to disagreements, both sides are seeking to boost economic ties and increase trade. Turkey's opposition to US sanctions on Iran presents a window of opportunity for enhancing relations. In a time of regional detente, recent diplomatic contacts between Turkey and Iran, as well as President Erdogan's visit to Tehran, have opened the possibility of a new era in bilateral relations. So, in this session, we will discuss the main obstacles to improved relations between the two countries, as well as possible channels. My name is Merve Akın, and I'm Deputy Researcher at TRT World Research Center. And today, two gentlemen joining me, both in Washington, D.C. Let me introduce them very quickly. Alex Vatanka, he is director of the Iran program at the Middle East Institute, and his recent books published last year, The Battle of the Ayatollahs in Iran, the United States Foreign Policy and Political Rivalry since 1979, which I'm looking forward to read it. And Dr. Kadir Üstün, he is the executive director at SETA Foundation in Washington, D.C. So, a warm welcome to both of you. So, let me start with you, Mr. Watanka. It's a general question, so I'm asking to both of you actually. So, in the last 2 weeks, the Middle East had one of its busiest days, from Biden's visit to Saudi Arabia to a trilateral meeting in Tehran. And meanwhile, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is underway, we know. What do these developments mean in terms of regional and global dynamics? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you, and it's great to see my good friend Kadir again. I look forward to our conversation. Look, I think obviously the Middle East, including Iran and Turkey and other regional states, I think this is and it almost sounds like a cliche, but I really think there's a moment of fluid moving parts that are constantly moving at different speeds in different directions, by which I mean countries are trying to reassess and adjust their policies based on the current events today. You mentioned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That's one major factor that is obviously shaping calculations in the region. Frankly, a lot of us in Washington were not sure if President Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia would have happened without the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think that invasion did accelerate the process of rapprochement between Washington and Riyadh, simply because of, the United States now is in a position where it has to reassert its authority globally. It's a process that began obviously in Europe with the recommitment to the North Atlantic Alliance. And then the president went to East Asia and spoke to allies and partners in that part of the world, like South Korea and Japan and others, on the issue of challenges that China might pose to the US and allies. And then lastly, President Biden obviously went to Israel and Saudi Arabia. I think, again, that just is one expression of how we're seeing countries, including the United States, looking at the new realities and making new decisions based on the new realities. I think specifically on Iran and Turkey and President Erdogan's visit to Tehran, which was obviously attended also by President Putin, it's really early to say whether this was a major breakthrough in terms of relations, if this is a symbolic moment only, or if it in fact means we're about to see closer cooperation between Iran and Turkey in the economic area, as you mentioned, or even in security related matters like the future of Bashar al-Assad in Syria and other matters. But I think there's no doubt that the Iranian side, for sure, turned to the trilateral summit, if you will, of Erdogan, Ibrahim Raisi, and Vladimir Putin to say Iran is not isolated. In other words, Iran wants to stay in this game, even as the region is shifting and different actors are moving in different directions. The Iranians are saying that, don't forget, there is this country called Iran, and we also have interest, and we're also willing to have a dialogue with countries that are maybe willing to have a dialogue with us. And I think obviously Turkey is on that list. Let me stop here and listen to Kadir.
Okay, so as Russia, I think Iran and Russia is trying to show they are not isolated, they are there. So I think we need to wait to see the outcome of Tehran summit, as you emphasized. Dr. Üstün, for the same question, what is your take on this? I mean, what can you add? Because I know in one of your recent pieces, you analyzed Biden's visit to Middle East. So what can you add?
Thank you. It's great to be with you both, Merve and Alex. Alex gave a very good overview of what's happening both at the global level and regional level. So for Turkey, for a while now, we're seeing efforts to kind of, better the relations with the countries like UAE, Israel, Egypt, among others. So there's a bit of a recent shift in Turkish foreign policy over the past year, let's say, emerging out of the pandemic, sort of recalibrating the relations with all countries in the region, including Saudi Arabia. UAE leader Mohammed bin MBZ and MBS, both of them, there were visits between Turkey and these countries. So these were significant, and I'm sure Iran was watching that closely. Iran also felt a bit left out when there was the second war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and Turkey's intervention on the side of Azerbaijan. Turkey gained some ground there, strategic ground, and Russia kind of accommodated or had to accommodate Turkey's entry in a bold way into South Caucasus. So Iran was watching that as well. Iran was watching Turkey's improving relations with Israel as well. So, but Turkey is also militarily present in Iraq and Northern Syria as well. So these are all areas that Iran strategically cares about in the region in terms of its influence. And there is a bit of ongoing, obviously, relations, economic relations, mainly energy relations between Turkey and Iran. Those have to continue. Both countries have an important interest in that. But what Alex mentioned, sort of pushing the economic relations much higher and making bilateral trade into the tens of billions, it's something it's been talked about many times, but it's hard because Iran is under sanctions, and it's really difficult to do business with Iran beyond the perhaps energy sector, which is also vulnerable to sanctions as well. So Turkey's relations with Iran is complicated by the regional strategic picture, but some things have to continue. And the other thing is, in northern Syria, especially where Turkey cares about the most, Iran is there physically. Pro-Iranian groups are there. They are on the ground. Russia, is there, especially their air force. So Turkey has felt over the past, since 2000, let's say 15, Russia's intervention into Syria, Turkey felt that it had to talk to these actors because they were on the ground and they could deliver things, and they would make life difficult for Turkey as well. But these are actors. You have to do, sit at the table and try to protect your own interests.
Yeah, Dr. Uston, we'll actually come to that. I mean, Syria. But let me ask another question. You said Iran is watching, so this meeting was really important because President Erdogan's last visit to Tehran was in 2018, and we didn't see high-level visits in the previous few years. So, what is the meaning, the importance of President Erdogan's visit regarding Turkish-Iranian relations? Sorry. So do you think it will give a new impetus to bilateral relations?
Well, when you look at the statements afterwards, these are not. Iran warned Turkey against impending military operation, Turkish operation in northern Syria, and within days we've seen some, things, funny things, let's say, quote unquote, happening in Iraq, and then in Idlib, Russians and Iranians kind of, this is how it was perceived, at least, giving Turkey some warning not to go forward. So on the Syria front, I think there were talks, but I didn't see any major agreement or progress. And beyond that, it was more like there was the extension of Turkey's energy contracts, natural gas, and I think President Erdogan going there had multiple reasons, including Turkey has been trying to talk to Putin for since the start of the Ukraine war, and Turkey just achieved that grain deal, grain exports deal, and so it's important for Turkey to be still talking to Putin because they hope that they can achieve some ceasefires and they want to be the brokers of an eventual potential peace deal. But so going to Tehran, I'm not sure how much that was about Iran because, several times visits were announced but postponed. That shows you how difficult Turkish-Iranian relations have been difficult. And finally, they needed to talk about especially Turkey's impending operation in northern Syria under the Astana process framework. So that was important for Turkish leader to go to Tehran. But to be honest, it's a difficult relationship because the two countries have conflicting interests throughout the Middle East and the region.
Yeah, definitely. A similar question to Mr. Rotanka, because it has been a year since Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi took office. I mean, the meeting was obviously significant for Raisi to show himself, right? So, what can you tell us about the developments in political affairs from the Iranian perspective?
Yeah, if I may just quickly also just follow up on what Kadir said, and then I'll turn to Raisi. I mean, look, I agree. I totally agree. There was nothing, at least not that was released, that we could pick up to suggest that there was some kind of a moment of Iran and Turkey finding each other and agreeing in terms of what ought to happen in Syria. Fundamentally, Iran and Turkey remain at dispute in terms of the future of one man, Bashar al-Assad. That's really what it is. I think, the Iranians would probably be much more forthcoming with Turkey in terms of the future of Syria as one country and the balance of power there if they were assured by Ankara that Assad would stay. I think that's that's my reading of the Iranian concern, at least. I think, also on the point about what divides them, there are many issues. Kadir pointed them out very nicely. Syria is one. Iraq is the one that's in the news today. And it's not on just a security issue. For example, we know that the Iranians and the Turkish companies compete for the market in Iraq. We know that Iran and Turkey are also rivals of sorts. It's not that intense, but it also happens in places like Lebanon, in places like Qatar, in Afghanistan. Even we saw that in recent year, even over things like who's going to be operating the Kabul airport, when the Turkish companies for a while were in competition initially. So, but I mean, once we start just focusing on the bad news and what divides them, we then lose sight of what Turkey and Iran have actually also managed to do for 40 some years now, since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which is overall there's a lot of suspicion. But overall, there's also an understanding in Turkey and in Iran that this is a relationship that, if it gets out of control, would not benefit either, that it would be a lose-lose equation. So therefore, I think, despite their differences, you've seen these two countries manage their relations and their tensions, in fact, much better than, say, Iranian tensions with Saudi Arabia, right? And you can use other examples. And I think that tells you quite a bit about this sort of the strength, both in Ankara, but also in Tehran, in the viewpoint that says, yes, we have our differences in the Caucasus, in Syria, and elsewhere, but this is not a relationship that we can allow or afford, certainly not from Iran's perspective, because, Iran is far more isolated than Turkey is. Despite what the Iranian regime might want to claim, they are, they don't have that many friends out there, and they can't afford to lose more of their partners. And Turkey certainly is a partner, not a 100% partner all the time, but it's a partner. Now, specifically to your point about Raisi, I hate to be cynical, and people might disagree with this, but I do not believe that Ebrahim Raisi has much to say or control over Iranian foreign policy. He's a symbolic figure. For example, people were saying that the visit of Vladimir Putin to Tehran was his moment in the sun. Vladimir Putin would have probably not gone to Tehran had it not been to see Khamenei, the supreme leader. And that's the key here. The supreme leader has been the supreme leader of Iran, the one decisive force, certainly on the issue of Iran's relations with Russia since 1989. Way before anybody had heard of Ebrahim Raisi. So yes, Ebrahim Raisi will be in the frame, in the pictures, but this is a strategic relationship that between Russia and Iran, the two centers of power shape more than anyone else. The office of the supreme leader, that's Ali Khamenei as inner circle, people like Ali Akbar Velayati and others, and the Revolutionary Guards, who are the ones who are actually dividing the labor in places like Syria. So I don't think we should read much into the presidency of Raisi or what he has achieved or not achieved the last 1 year. The reason why he's there, we can discuss that later, why he was put on a silver platter and made president and what Khamenei was thinking with that calculation. But I just would emphasize that it's really important not to believe that the presidency in the Islamic Republic on key foreign policy issues is the driving voice. It's not.
Yeah, 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 you are right, and I agree with you. And Dr. Mr. Vatanka, you said, I mean, despite all differences, we have a relationship here, either lose-lose or different. How it became possible? I mean, how they managed to do it?
Look, I think there's the two countries are actually much closer than a lot of people think they are. I mean, if anybody's traveled to Iran and Turkey, you will see similarities that you would not see if you, for example, traveled in Iran and some of the Arab Gulf states. I mean, there's a cultural affinity, never mind the geographic proximity. For example, religious differences between the Iranians and Turks have never really been a major factor, except some small, very religious-minded people. The Shia-Sunni factor is never really a driver, which is really important when you think about how destructive intra-Islamic divisions have been to the Islamic world the last certainly 10 years and plus. It's not been a factor in Iranian-Turkish relations. Then you have, I mean, basic things like today Iranians were up until a few months ago the largest investors in terms of buying homes in Turkey. It's a country Iranians feel home in. They invest in things like property to start businesses. There is to this day no visa requirement for Iranians to go to Turkey. So you have a large number of Iranian tourists who love going to Turkey and enjoy the social freedoms that Turkey offers, which unfortunately they don't have at home because Iran has very draconian social rules, which has killed Iran's tourism industry entirely, despite Iran's massive potential for tourism. But that's a political decision Ali Khamenei has made, and the Iranian people have to live with the consequences. And I'd just
Yeah.
like to point out, a very final point on this. Think about it. Iran and Turkey, in terms of potential in the field of economy, I mean, they combined populations just under 200 million in terms of the size of their market. 200 million, almost. It's just under. I mean, the 27 European Union countries combined come to about 440 million. So this is a large potential market where lots of investment can be done, lots of trade can be done. If the politics is in place, if the suspicious nature sometimes that we find in terms of attitudes by the leadership against one another, if that decreases and businesses are allowed to thrive, it would make a huge difference. But Kadir made the point about Iran's sanctions, being under sanctions. That's a reality. That's the elephant in the room. Turkish private companies, if they want to go in Iran, as much as they might find the Iranian market attractive, they might have business interest in America or in Europe elsewhere. So Iran's overall isolation doesn't help its integration into the global economy, including relations with Turkey that could potentially be so huge in their relations.
Yeah, I
Let
see.
me just
Yeah.
add a couple of things. I do agree with Alex, actually, that when I was emphasizing the regional conflict areas, those are all regional areas. At the bilateral level, Alex is right that the two countries have made sure that some of the core interests were not impacted, and they continue, including energy, bilateral trade, and tourism, among others. That's And I agree that the potential has been very strong. And actually, if you remember in the 2010s, when the United States was pressuring Iran and Turkey was uh, pushing for diplomacy and trying to negotiate, broker a deal between the two. At that time, Turkey's perspective was that integration of Iran into the economic sort of at the economic level into the region, especially, was very important. And to achieve that, there needed to be a deal on the nuclear side. And I don't think they've shifted that view all that much. They still support a deal. They support, opening up of Iran and all that. But as we all know from, the U.S. policy and U.S.-Iran dynamic and Gulf-Iran dynamic, that's not going to be resolved very soon, it seems like. But yeah, I agree. It's a shame that there's a lot of potential between the two countries, but it's not being realized. And when you look at especially Turkish businesses and construction, etc., in many third countries, in other countries, you see very successful examples that could be replicated between these two. But when it comes to current regional picture, then you see many strategic problems. And Merve, you mentioned my recent piece about Biden's visit. I forgot to respond to that. We are seeing a Washington that is unsure about, in many ways, what to do with Iran. We saw that during Biden's visit in Israel pushed him to commit to some sort of military action. He refused. In many ways, that's a classic policy. But Israel is not comfortable, and the tensions between Israel and Iran in the region are increasing as a result. And I didn't see a policy proposal by Biden administration that could actually help resolve those tensions. So it's becoming a bit more dangerous. The Israel and Iran got used to this, hitting each other here and there in the region. At a certain level, it's a manageable business. But when it came to Turkey, for instance, there was a foiled attempt by Iranians to target the Israelis that created additional tensions between Turkey and Iran as well. So Biden administration not being able to come up with solutions in the region, or be productive in their approach to the region, I think that is one of the, at least, many problems in the region.
Yeah, I see. So both of you touched upon the economy. I mean, the economy is key regarding these relations with all of these things. So, but especially in the last years, Mr. Motanka, the economic relationship between Turkey and Iran has been, I mean, unsatisfactory, right? And below the desired level, which is targeted as 30 billion for trade volume. And when we consider US sanctions on Iran, as you mentioned, how likely is this goal to be achieved and what needs to be done to reach that level?
Well, the number of things that need to be addressed, but I think above all, one of the issues here that frankly is outside of obviously Turkish ability to control, it's Iran's isolation on the global economic stage, which is a reflection of Iranian foreign policy and their standoff with the United States and the West in general. I mean, we were talking about Vladimir Putin in Tehran, and you might have seen the photo of him standing with Ayatollah Khamenei, the Iranian supreme leader, who had a very large smile on his face. And we have to question, why is Khamenei so happy? I mean, what is it that Vladimir Putin can do for the Iranian economy when he's struggling to finish what it is, if he can finish his invasion of Ukraine? I mean, what is it that makes Khamenei so happy? Well, the answer is very simple. Ayatollah Khamenei is a man who, over the course of the last 3 decades, and certainly, even before he became supreme leader in the 80s, over the years has developed this sort of animosity towards the United States. And he's waited to this point where he is now almost convinced in his mind that Russia and China and the rest of the world is going to sort of start catching up with the United States. They will come to Iran's aid. Iran would not need to solve its differences with the Americans. Doesn't need to be a nuclear agreement and so forth. This is his mindset. And at the same time as he has this mindset, right now, as we sit here and discuss this panel, Iran is losing something like $150 million per day just in oil export income lost because of the sanctions per day. And I'm not talking about all the other things Iran is losing out. Just the oil export revenue, it's over $150 million per day. This is what the Iranian economy is dealing with. The politician, in this case Ayatollah Khamenei, he does not have a great strategic ideas on the economy. He's not a man who is preoccupied with economic issues. And in fact, his inner circle will tell you that the economy is secondary for him, that they don't want to become Dubai. They don't want to become Istanbul. They're not here for this earth. They're not here for the size of the buildings. That this is all about preparing themselves for, in their mind, for the afterlife. So, that's a fundamental problem that's in the way, because as you pointed out, the numbers speak for themselves. Last time Erdogan was in Iran, 2018, the year before 2017, trade was about 10 billion. Today, or last year, was about 5 billion. Some of it you can blame on COVID. A lot of it you have to blame on sanctions, but a lot of it is to do with lack of imagination. And unfortunately, as I said before, I do think Iran and Turkey try and separate files and not get engage one another in sort of conflict when they could be avoided. But, there are still petty rivalries. If you look at, for example, the Turkish-Iranian rivalry in the transportation sector, Iran could become a bridge for Central Asia to Turkey to Europe if they're trying to avoid transiting through Russian territory for the transportation of goods and services, including oil and gas. Right? Iran could be a bridge. Where is that conversation today between Iran and Turkey? And I think the Central Asian states would be very ready to have that conversation. But politically, we're not there yet. I think there's a lot that can be done once the politicians actually start thinking in terms of economics, in terms of creating jobs, in terms of dealing with the concerns of their citizens today, which are about jobs, which are about high inflation, which happens to be a problem both in Turkey and Iran today. So the zero-sum game mentality that if I win, you have to lose, which unfortunately has been so part of Middle Eastern politics, broader Middle East, including Turkey, for so long, that's still there. I'm hoping is going to go away. We see some tendencies right now that are really wonderful. For example, we see the conversation in the Gulf states with Iran about ways they can cooperate dealing with climate change. This is a conversation Iran can have with Turkey. I mean, if you look at some of the satellite imagery in terms of the sandstorms that are impacting the entire region, there is no one country that can deal with it on their own. There needs to be collective effort. That's just on climate change. And you can talk about many other areas where collaboration can work. And Turkey and Iran only need to look at Europe. Europe's after Second World War and what economic integration has done for the green continent. Why can't the Middle East do that? Why can't Middle Eastern states that literally sit on billions of dollars in oil income pull their resources together for the common good? To do that, you need a political vision. And as I said, I don't know about the Turkish side, but certainly on the Iranian side, unfortunately, that's not there. I don't see that with Ayatollah Khamenei, at least.
Yeah, so you emphasize the mindset, the political, the economic mindset of Khamenei. So just a quick question. I mean, maybe not a question, but a comment. So the recent deal between Iran and Gazprom is like showing solidarity between two states while both under sanctions, because it doesn't look like feasible to materialize, does it?
I'm sorry, if that was for me very quickly, that is something we've heard so many times before, promises of billions of dollars. Number one, Russia has no interest in seeing Iranian oil and gas coming to the market and replacing Russian gas. The Russians have the opposite interest, to keep Iranian oil and gas in the field, in the ground, because then they can't compete with the Russians. So this idea that Russia is looking after for Iranian economic well-being, China is different. China needs Iran's oil and gas. Russia is a competitor with Iran. So I think it's just as simple as that.
Yeah. So, Dr. Üstün, Mr. Vatanka mentioned the Khamenei's mindset, he meant his inner circle. So in this regard, what are the main determinants that shape Turkey-Iran relations? Are they more ideational or material? I mean, do you think Turkey-Iran relations have a static, constant, or unchangeable nature, or is it a context that change from one administration to another?
Well, look, there are aspects of all of what you said. After the revolution, there was the ideology to, spread the revolution, to export it to other countries. And Turkey was a serious target. And early 80s, Turkish state tried to defend against that. And, many things happened. Let me not go into history. But then there were the regional wars, Iraq War, 2 Iraq wars. So Turkey's relations with Iran were often complicated by the tensions and conflicts in the region, and today is no different. In terms of regime typology, obviously Turkey is very different than Iran, but Alex mentioned it, and I agreed with it. The two countries managed to sort of have their national interests sort of negotiated well with each other, let's say, with lots of problems, lots of tensions back and forth, but never did they come to the brink of serious conflict. It's part of the reason is also geography. The border with Iran is rather difficult. It's impenetrable, and it's there are many mountains there. But Iran is a serious power in the region. If I were to say, give me 4 or 5 countries, it's Iran, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi. The sort of fate of the region is tied to these regional countries. Of course, then there is the US and Russia as the global powers. But this has been a difficult relationship in many ways, but they managed it. And then that relationship is often punctuated by conflicts in the region. But even at its most difficult time, like Iran was under huge pressure in 2010. Turkey was the one taking risks under President Erdogan. At the time, he was prime minister. They were taking Turkish politicians were taking serious risks in the international community to help reach a nuclear deal, because the idea was, as soon as you have a deal, we can actually go in and do business with Iran. And that backfired. I think there was lack of imagination in Washington at the time. There was a quick refusal of that deal, although it was encouraged by President Obama at the time. That was a shame, to be honest. I think that was the first time, Iran had put their signature on a piece of paper about their nuclear program, and it hasn't been resolved, right? Pressure, maximum pressure, isolation, everything. It simply strengthened the resolve of the regime, often at the expense of common citizens, like Alex said, Iranian citizens, and it hasn't been good for the region. When Obama reached a deal, he failed at making that a treaty that would be embraced. So there were many failures along the way of the international community, and ultimately, it's a power struggle, right? A global power trying to discipline a regional power, and that dynamic, unfortunately, kind of takes oxygen out of everything in the region. Not everything, but many imaginative things like Alex is talking about could have been realized. So it makes the Turkish-Iranian relationship limited. What is Turkey's strength? Turkey's strength is not its regional, let's say, militia power. Although it has a lot of military footprint, but Turkey is not like Iran in the region in that sense. What its strength is, the economic abilities, experience with, Europe, making quality products, increasing trade, increasing tourism. Turkey has a lot of experience doing that, and Turkey is quite, integrated into the EU system, etc. So when that dynamic about Iran nuclear situation is not, does not evolve into a positive place, it simply allows the problems to fester, and some old school, let's say, strategists in the region to be proven correct about Iran, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Dr. Ustin, very important points you have made. And you said we are not same. I mean, we don't have proxies or militias, let's say. And we know that the Turkish troops are on the verge of conducting a military operation in Northern Syria to eradicate the PKK-YPG terrorist threat. And Iran criticizes intentions. But meanwhile, through its proxies, Iran continues to preserve and increase its presence in Syria. So regarding the clash of geopolitical agendas here between Iran and Turkey, what can you tell us?
Well, Turkey does work with some proxies in Syria, Syrian proxies that, Turkey has been helping since the start of the uprising. And Iran's relationship with Syria, from the very first moment, it was going to be full support, right? And Alex mentioned earlier, Assad regime remaining in power, even if it may not be about Assad himself personally, but that regime staying in power it has been strategically important. It's critical for Iran. So Turkey has been focusing in recent years on the border and what happens along the border, the terror threat from PYD and PKK. So it hasn't been talking so much about the regime, but it has been talking to power brokers like Russia and Iran, recognizing that they are the ones who hold real power in the Syrian territory, and they're the ones who can make things happen or who can make Turkey's life difficult. So there is very clear-eyed recognition, I think, on the Turkish side of that reality, which is why you're seeing the talk announcement for plans about intervening in northern Syria and making sure that there's a safe zone area, then refugees can return, etc. That's Turkey's plan, but Turkey is not doing that just unilaterally without informing these parties, because that would create more problems for Turkey, and that's a wise strategy. Does it mean that they will give up on such a potential operation because Iran doesn't like it? That's unlikely as well. I think Turkey will insist on some things that it has consistently pushed the US and others for years now. It wants a certain security belt in northern Syria where reconstruction can happen under Turkish influence, and at least some refugees can return, because it's created a lot of political problems inside Turkey for the ruling party as well. So when there are those dynamics, you're seeing that Turkey's, what happens in northern Syria, Turkey is trying to, make sure that there's no real backlash from Iran or Russia. But even then, we are seeing them. I mentioned earlier that what happened in Iraq, the attack that was blamed on Turkey. I don't know if it's a false flag attack or something. We'll hopefully hear more about it, but Turkey is strongly denying that. And this is a bit similar to past events where all of a sudden some bomb explodes and then, there's backlash against Turkey, etc. So yeah, let me stop there. I feel like I
Yeah.
talk too much.
No, actually, so what I see, we have no changes in this regard. I mean, when compared to previous military operations of Turkey, Iran was always against Turkey's presence in Syria, but on the ground, Turkey was capable conducting them. So what I see as outcome of Tehran summit, Turkey sent its message very clearly, I mean, regarding this issue. So, Mr. Watanka, so we talked about Syria, and both of you mentioned Azerbaijan, South Caucasus, but let me go into detail. I mean, South Caucasus is another region where Turkey and Iran act in different directions. After the Nagorno-Karabakh war, the second one, Iran's influence in the region decreased due to Tehran's inconsistent policies, let's say. So besides the political process, considering the energy issue as well, what awaits the region regarding the relations between Ankara and Tehran? And if you want to, if you have something to add to previous comment by Dr. Üstün, floor is yours.
Sure. No, I'll stay with the South Caucasus. Just a few points, if I may. Look, I know the Iranian leadership were very upset what happened in 2020 because they were caught by surprise. But the reason why Iran was caught by surprise in terms of what happened in South Caucasus and the return of Azerbaijani lands to Azerbaijan was not Turkey's fault, was not Azerbaijan's fault, wasn't anybody's fault. It's Iran's fault. Iran is preoccupied, instead of South Caucasus, with South Lebanon or with Yemen. Iran is pursuing these objectives in faraway lands that have very little, oftentimes, with Iranian national interest. South Caucasus, what happens to the South Caucasus is an immediate national security issue for the country of Iran. What happens in Yemen, it's an ideological project of Ali Khamenei. What happens in Yemen would have very little impact on Iranian national interest. So the Iranians are upset that they weren't consulted about a war that happened that surprised them. It's their fault. They should have been more involved. They can't blame Turkey for wanting to support its partner country, Azerbaijan. They can't blame the Israelis, because Azerbaijan as a sovereign country has a right to choose its security partners. They happen to have a very good security cooperation, Israel and Azerbaijan, a proven one. And for the sovereign state of Azerbaijan, a country of 10 million people, it's their right to want to free 20% of their land that was occupied by a foreign force. So, I mean, it's Iran's fault. The Iranians are now trying to do damage control. We've seen the last year or so, lots of visits between Tehran and Baku, economic cooperation, maybe security cooperation. That's all very good. That should be welcome. The whole region needs more economic and political dialogue and integration. But I think if the Iranians, put the ultimatum to Baku that, if you have Israelis on your soil, then we can't be on friendly terms anymore. This is the sort of attitude that needs to change. Iran has accepted Israel indirectly when you look at Iran's acceptance of the Abraham Accords. Today, Iran accepts that UAE has diplomatic relations with Israel, and yet Iran and UAE are talking, are trading. So why can't Iran apply the same logic to a country like Azerbaijan? And I think if they do that, if they show some more maturity on that front and end their obsession with Israel, and you could argue that Israel is also upset with Iran, but I have a different take on that, but that's a separate story. What I'm saying is South Caucasus is extremely important to Iranian national interest. The reason why the Iranians were caught by surprise was because they were paying attention elsewhere. And that's their mistake. It's nobody else's mistake. But I also say this, it's a very sensitive issue, because if Turkey and Iran end up becoming more rivals in South Caucasus, then unfortunately we could have very dire consequences, not just for Turkish-Iranian relations, for the broader region. You could see a nightmare scenario where might be some elements in Turkey who might want to incite the Azeris in Iran. The idea of Greater Azerbaijan might come up. This will for sure create backlash in certain circles in Tehran. They will in turn probably try and go back to the bad days of 1980s or early 1990s and team up with Kurdish militants as a way of getting back at Turkey. So you create a vicious cycle, a tit for tat. That's not good for the South Caucasus. It's not good for Turkish-Iranian relations. And I hope we avoid that. So far, we've avoided it. I hope wiser heads would prevail, because the region needs to go in a different direction of dialogue, cooperation, and looking for opportunities where everybody can gain, everybody can win. I mentioned climate change, but there could be lots of other opportunities where you can have win-win cooperation among states, including Turkey and Iran.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Uston, do you think same? I mean, the vicious cycle Mr. Botanka mentioned in South Caucasus. You are muted.
My apologies. South Caucasus for Turkey has several implications. One, the relationship with Azerbaijan is very special for Turkey, and the two countries have been building deep ties for a long time, including energy and military now, with Turkish drones being used in the latest war. It is also Turkey's, maybe not necessarily conscious, not necessarily against Russia or against Iran, but the fact is, when Turkey develops these relations with Azerbaijan and tries to create an actual physical trading route through Nakhchivan to the rest of Central Asia, that kind of is not something that Russia or Iran will be happy about, because they see South Caucasus as their backyard. It's been within their sort of area of influence for a long time. So Turkey coming in as a different actor, new actor, is going to cause, let's say, problems, cause sort of anxiety. And Alex rightly pointed out, Iran was a bit, late to the game. It took them by surprise, but Russia was surprised also. They quickly adjusted, and then they used it as an opportunity to sort of weaken Pashinyan, who was very pro-Western until then, So, but they quickly sent their sort of troops, peacekeeping troops, um, and they tried to basically make the most out of the new situation while accommodating some of the Turkish presence there. So we've seen a little bit of a lack of flexibility, let's say, on the Iranian part. They've seen these relations that Azerbaijan develops with Turkey and Israel as somehow anti-Iran. Um, the reality is that some of it is, right. Some of it is anti-Iran or against Iran, or it will exclude Iran or like limit their domain. But they could be as flexible as Russia. They could try to think in terms of the new situation. So um, there is the energy aspect. The fact is, right now, Central Asian, energy route is very important for Europe in the face of, Russia reducing the natural gas, and this dynamic for the next few years is going to continue. So Turkmenistan natural gas, Azerbaijani sources, these are very important for Europe, and it's going to simply increase the importance of Turkey's pipelines from these uh, existing pipeline, but also planned pipelines, more important for Europe and the international markets, which in turn will works against sort of Iranian and Russian energy sort of sectors. So I don't blame them for taking issue with this or trying to, limit Turkey's activities, perhaps, or showing discomfort. But if we want to go back to Alex's proposals, you want to be part of the game. You don't want to end up outside the game. So you develop new policies, new approaches based on the new conditions. You may have lost this round, but you can come back to table, because we've seen with the Tehran visit, Erdogan is practical and open to negotiations and improving ties. He's still talking about these big economic trade goals. So I don't think much is lost. It could just be reshaped, and Azerbaijan is going to be careful. They are going to try to balance these powers with each other: Turkey with Iran, Russia with the United States, Israel with others, etc. So pretty much all regional countries have to play this game. So
Yeah, definitely. So we will see in near future, I guess. Mr. Ratanka, in your previous response, you mentioned Yemen and Abraham Accords, which brings me to my last question, actually. Uh, so Iran seems willing to improve relations with the Gulf. I mean, Raisi's call for detente, as you define in one of your pieces. Uh, when we look at Turkey, we see important steps to normalize relations, to take a step further with some Gulf countries as well as Israel, as you mentioned. So within this entanglement of ties, where can we position Iran? I mean, what actions will Iran take in the face of possible blocks?
Oh, this is a big question. So forgive me for being very sort of brief, because I think I could go on forever, and you don't want that. So look, I think Kadir mentioned President Erdogan in Tehran, and I think Erdogan was at a NATO summit before. Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei has not left Iran since 1989. I think Ali Khamenei has created a sort of a parallel universe of sorts, almost, in terms of how the world out there really works. I think Turkey is doing a much better job with its leadership in being realistic, in facing the challenges that Turkey is facing, its economy is facing. The way Turkey's turned to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE. I mean, these are all signs of flexibility, maturity, being able to put an economy first and put an ideology aside. And I don't see the same commitment on the part of the leadership in Tehran. Yes, they speak about focusing on improving relations with neighboring states. Yes, they're having an ongoing dialogue with the Saudis. But the fact is, Iran today does not have diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. The fact is, Ali Khamenei is not going to go to Riyadh, and Mohammed bin Salman is not going to go to Tehran. The fact is, Iran has not been able to reestablish diplomatic relations with Egypt for almost 40 years. Relations with Jordan is extremely poor, and I can go on. The list is long. In fact, Iran's foreign policy successes, the proxies that we talk about, they're all a drain on Iranian economy. They cost Iran money. They don't bring Iran any money. From Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon to the militias in Syria, Assad, and so on, Houthis in Yemen, they all cost Iran money. None of these proxies are creating economic opportunities for the Iranian people, who are literally on the brink of some sort of economic disaster that's happening in front of our eyes very slowly, but it's surely happening. This requires political vision. I do not think Khamenei will be the person with that vision, but he is an old man. He's 83 or 4, I'm not sure. And at some point there will be a new leadership. And that new Iranian leadership needs to really take a hard look about Iranian national interest and accept the fact that the revolution happened in 1979. Iran can no longer claim to be able to export its revolution. It can do it realistically. The region doesn't want Iran's revolution. Those pockets that accept it will only cost Iran dearly. They're not bringing anything positive really for Iranian national interest. Again, these are all political issues. And final point I say about the rest of the region, when there's an opportunity, do whisper in the ears of the Iranian leaders and tell them, listen, you being isolated, it's not good for anybody. It's not good for Turkey that Iran is isolated. If Iran becomes North Korea, a nuclear weapon state with a collapsed economy, that's a disaster for everyone in the region, for the Gulf states, for Turkey, for everyone. Iran's future is linked to the rest of the region, and they are stakeholders. Everybody has to do what they can do to get the Iranian leadership to see sense and change course as soon as they can, for the sake of Iranian people and for the sake of the rest of the region.
Thank you, Mr. Vatanka. You summarized very well. I really enjoyed the discussion. I mean, of course, there are many things. I mean, as you said, we are going on this forever, but unfortunately, our time is up. Thank you for your contribution, Alex Vatanka and Kadir Istin. And I also thank our audience for listening. Next time, I'll be here to discuss another development on Turkey's Middle East policy. So if you're interested, stay tuned for next digital debates. Have a nice day.
Thank you.